Hey folks, welcome back. We're doing episode 2 of The Hole on the Corner, where we talk about all things R.A. Lafferty, and we're going to jump into the 70s novels as advertised. This time, a few quick things I wanted to say. I forgot to mention last time, this is called The Hole on the Corner because that's the name of a short story by Lafferty, I think 1967, collected in the seminal collection 900 Grandmothers. It's a great multiverse tale as only Lafferty would do it, and I think it speaks to the holes we're going to fall into, trying to discuss his fiction together, I hope. So that's where the name comes from. It wasn't just a random name. Also, I wanted to say that, when you see me with these huge stacks of Lafferty books, I realized last night as I thought about it, I've been collecting Lafferty for 25 years, so it's been a long, laborious labor of love, and not always easy, though I got started at least early enough in the 90s to get in before it got really rare and really expensive. But anyway, so that's been an ongoing thing. Almost a lifelong thing, if you like, an adult lifelong thing. And then Nancy Leibovitz, someone you'll see in online conversations about Lafferty, a good conversation partner for all things Laffertian, commented on the last video that she wondered if I was going to go back through and deal with the novels in a more fine-grained analysis, each one. And yes, that is my plan, to do a video on each novel, or maybe sometimes 2 or 3 videos if we go for a deep dive. And I'm not going to promise I'm going to get through every one, but because we don't know what life brings. But let's aim for it. We're going to go back and go through individual novels. Yes. Also, Nancy suggested that I read some short stories on here. Now, that's something I've been wanting to do for years. I've wanted to read Lafferty. And this seems like it might work as a format for that. I love reading out loud. I read to my children when they were little, and I read some Lafferty stories out loud to them that I was very surprised, sung off the page. When you read it, there's an oral quality that you don't necessarily see when you're just reading it quietly to yourself. So I will give that a go, and we'll see how it goes. And lastly, I just wanted to say that, I haven't read most of these in a while, so I'm going on memory, okay? But I have not read a Lafferty novel that didn't have a massive impact on me. So I've got impressions, I've got things to say, but also I'm probably going to botch some details. So please, in the comments say, that's not what happened in that novel, or that's not that character's name, or whatever it may be. I love being fact checked. I want us to, set the record straight together. So without further preamble, let's jump into the 70s, R.A. Lafferty in the 70s. Now the thing is, last novel was in 69. In 70, the seminal collection 900 Grandmothers comes out of short stories, and nothing else happens. And in 71, Lafferty does a second big bang. And he publishes in 68 he published 3 novels. In 71 he publishes not 3 but 4 novels. And here's what begins to happen. Lafferty takes a left turn in many ways, in several respects, okay? And a lot of people just aren't going to follow Lafferty into the 70s and beyond in terms of his novels. That's okay. Maybe it's not for everybody. I do think you're missing out. I think he does some of his best stuff. But hey, whatever works for everybody. But let's start off with maybe the most clear connection to what he had done before, because, he's trying to write genre fiction. So let's start with Arrive at Easter Wine, which is, I'd say, Past Master and Arrive at Easter Wine are probably the 2 most clearly science fictional novels. You would say Space Shanty as well, but I just think it's okay, fine. Let's call that a main science fiction novel as well. But it's in a folkloric, mythic realm to me, with science fiction tropes. Whatever, I don't care what we say, but this is definitely science fiction because its full title is Arrive at Easter Wine, the autobiography of a catistic machine, as conveyed to R.A. Lafferty. That's the full title. And he has letters in the beginning explaining how he got this manuscript from this AI, this sentient, intelligent computer that has sort of robot extensions that tells the computer tells his own story. Now, the thing is, if you've read the short fiction or you're a fan of the short fiction, you'll have run into this guy. He's called Epictistes, or Epict for short. And he's part of a group of characters who call themselves the Institute for Impure Science. You gotta love that. those stories are classics. They're beloved of Lafferty fans. Thus We Frustrate Charlemagne is one of the main ones that is well known and loved. A really great time travel twist sort of thing. Not twist, but like it twists up what time travel does. And Epictistes is this computer that has these various sort of robotic forms that he takes on, extensions of his main computer self, because it's the 70s, so it's a huge computer that fills up like, you know, a basement or something. So if you've read those, like I had before I read this, you come in with expectations, and it's not going to meet your expectations. It didn't mine anyway. I felt that this was very different than the short stories. It has qualities of the short stories for sure, but they're such little gems, and they tie together, and they're funny, and they're focused. This it is more focused than it appears on first read. It actually is really clearly sort of thematically laid out, and he tells you what's going on, but you just don't catch it. Most people don't until they're told, or they notice it themselves on another go round and these sorts of things, and that was certainly the case with me. So I was a bit bewildered the first time I saw it. Didn't meet my expectations. I just wasn't sure what I thought of it. I did like it. There's so many pyrotechnic moments in it, some absolute jaw-dropping moments, and then just great phrases and humor, and the cosmic vision it ends with, and a tension between whether existence is horror or comedy, and these sorts of things. It's just great stuff. But I think this is his first novel that is, he's not all the way there. I think, you know, he felt even that I think he said something like it was like throwing a rock over a hill, and you can't see where it lands, or you're just hoping it lands where you wanted it to, and he wasn't too sure that it did. And you know, there's a sense in which you could call this a partial sort of, you could just call it uneven, but a partial failure of a novel is kind of how I think of it sometimes. A bit harsh maybe sounding, but then as you get to understand the novel, you realize it's a whole novel about failure and about failing our way into enlightenment. So it kind of fits. And I don't think he tried to make it a failure, but you know, he did the best he could. And I like art that fails. I like art that reaches so hard it can't quite get there. And I love artists that do that. I'm a fan of Captain Beefheart, the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson with his incomplete album Smile. Like, you know, some people's failures are better than other people's successes. And to some degree, I think that is true of Lafferty. So I think it's a great novel. And it is, I'm going to say it's a rant. You may like wildly disagree with me on this, but I think it's more of a discourse type novel with a bunch of fun stuff in it, but it's heavy on discourse, but the discourse is awesome, man. I mean, also it's a very, Past Master was also a very overtly theological novel, and so is this. But Lafferty's, you know, don't sleep on Lafferty's theological stuff if that's not your thing. Because, you know, he's got good stuff in there for almost everybody, but certainly I think, in addition to people interested in Catholic theology, if you're interested in esotericism, you know, maybe alchemism or alchemy or what have you, I think, you know, there's good stuff in here for you. So, you know, it isn't overtly, well, it's not overtly, it's like its very symbolism is kind of scratching the surface to see deeper symbols underneath is like one of the motifs in it. So it's a wild ride. I think it's great. And I think it's quite beloved in some other languages like Spanish and Japanese. So I'm going to call it a rant, but with definitely romp qualities. And if you wanted to call it a hybrid, I would go with that. Right. So the next one in 71 we're going to look at, we're allegedly still in genre fiction. The Devil is Dead, but I think we're taking yet a further step away. Lafferty's getting stranger. I think he's losing people, although this is a well-loved novel, at least by a lot of people. I was a little underwhelmed by it the first time I read it, just because I love Lafferty's pyrotechnics and his weirdest of weird stuff, and that's what I at first was just totally going for, and I didn't have patience for anything else. And then all these things that I thought, oh, I'm not sure I like that with short stories and novels. Later, I'm like, oh my God, I love this. And this is one of those. I love this novel, and it's beautiful. I think it's one of his most literary novels. And people say that the second half, you know, isn't as cohesive as the first. It's not, but I think that's intentional. I think this is a really solid front to back literary work. I think he's consistent. This is a gorgeous piece of prose. I think it is, frankly, I think it's magical realism. I really think it is. And people have joked that if Lafferty had a Latin surname, he'd be famous. but nobody's expecting that from this Irish Oklahoman. Anyway, and it tries to sell itself. The publishers tried to sell it as this really fantastical voyage. It is a voyage. There are fantastical elements, but they're very, very subtle in a lot of ways. There's maybe moments where they really come out. But the devil's in it, or a son of the devil, we're not sure. And he does die, or seems to die, but then isn't, and things like that. So it is as it says. But it's a lovely novel, and there's some action adventure in it, and there's dream. It's quite dreamlike in a lot of ways. Great novel, and it's part of a series called the Argo Mythos that we're not going to talk about. But it's the middle novel, but that's the one that came out first. But you can, and Lafferty said, and you just can read them separately. They kind of work on their own. And this is a great cover. I love this. It kind of gives you the wrong idea, but then once you get the hang of the novel, you kind of go back to it and you're like, no, actually, maybe that does kind of, in a metaphorical way, show what the novel's like. But Lafferty liked this cover a lot. Brilliant artwork. Sorry, I'm not going to take time to look who did it. He is pretty famous, and he did a bunch of covers like this for quite a few novels in this era. I'm even trying to look, and I can't see who it is, but you can tell me in the comments if you know. So that's The Devil is Dead, still in 1971. Then comes The Flame is Green. And all of a sudden, Lafferty is writing historical fiction. Now, The Devil is Dead I wouldn't call it historical fiction, but it is a period piece. It's set in sort of post-World War II, maybe the early 50s. I'm not sure. So tell me if you know. We'll figure it out when we go through it properly. So you could call it historical, but it just doesn't. It's not like what you would call historical. It's just it has a setting that's slightly in the past. Whereas this, I think, this is 19th century. I think it's about some revolutions that happened that I don't know about. This is a period of history I just don't understand or know about. And it's very much a historical novel in the Lafferty vein, so it's strange. And again, it borders on magical realism, somewhere between magical realism and sort of a fantasy of sorts. And this is in a series, and the next book is more blatantly fantastical. But this is great. It starts in Ireland. It's very Irish. The imagination is just wild and funny. Then it kind of moves into Europe and places in Europe, for Spain for a while and different places. And I think it's a little uneven for me. But some of its pyrotechnics are it's not as solid of a novel to me as The Devil is Dead in some ways, but its pyrotechnics are in some ways more exciting. So great novel, well worth checking out. But it's historical fiction, so people are like, what's Lafferty doing? What's this all about? Well, maybe the next book will help us in 1971. It's The Fall of Rome. It's got this map and everything. It's ostensibly kind of billed as a history, like an actual history book about the fall of Rome, and it gets into details about the Goths and the Romans and whatnot. This is one I haven't finished. People love this book and really rate it highly. I did like it, and I got a lot out of the, sort of the almost first half that I read, but it wasn't really, massively grabbing me. And it's just been on my to-do list. I'm sure I'll love it once I finish it, to be honest. I'm pretty sure I will. But again, as people are reading, they're like, this is magical realism again. There's a lot of history, more so than the other one. A lot of real history, or, real attempts at writing history in here. But there are novelistic elements, not entirely. And then there's just like fantastical elements here and there. And it's good. It's a good book, even from me who hasn't finished it, and is at this moment not the biggest fan, but it's good. And in the intro, just says some of the most important things about Lafferty's work as a mosaic of different pieces that add up to a larger picture, namely a face, a laughing face, the laughing face of Christ. But it's cool, man. It's really cool. If you're not into laughing Jesus, it's yeah. So that's 71, 4 novels, and it's like, where's Lafferty going? What is this all about? We're kind of hanging with him, maybe. So what's next? Another historical novel. What's it about? Native Americans, the Choctaw people, and this is a masterwork. This is an acknowledged masterwork, and still very obscure. It's not known by a lot of people, but those who know it, and it's the only book by Lafferty that's always been in print, thanks to the University of Oklahoma. Yeah, I saw a letter that he wrote in the archive of his manuscripts in Tulsa, where the publisher of this one was like, "Hey, don't you love the cover?" And he's like, "What's that wrinkled Cherokee doing on the cover? This is about a Choctaw, and a Choctaw who, by my descriptions, looks and seems a lot different than this lovely fellow. He's lovely, but he ain't no Hannali. Hannali Anomaly is the main character of Hannali. That right there, if you've read it, yeah, boy, that's Hannali. Larger than life, epic dude, funny as hell. A fighter, a lover, a leader. Oh man, I love him, and he's very Choctaw with the hat and stuff like that. So, Choctaw of that period, because it's actually I think it goes 1800 to 1900 possibly. Yeah, I can't remember if it's that or 1900. No, it must be. Yeah, of course it is. 1800 to 1900. And, he's essentially lives to be 100 years old. He's a composite of people that Lafferty studied and things. But he's written in an almost tall tale type fashion. Kind of ranges around between what I found almost dry history, but that actually added to the heft of the novel and made it more powerful ultimately. But like wonderful sort of tall tale Native American humor and storytelling type moments, some magical realism again, some action adventure, just a lot of history, a lot of hard history to read about what the Choctaw people went through and Native Americans more generally. It's frustrating. It's got a good in that regard, but it's so full of life and laughter and love. They're not tragic Indians. But I think Chickasaw and Cherokee, I think is his nation's writer, Geary Hobson, of a contemporary of Lafferty, wrote an introduction to this edition, so this one's worth getting, and it also has an introduction by Lafferty that's very enlightening. And he really endorses it, and he's like, if you're used to the whitewashed history of Oklahoma school systems, this is going to surprise you because it shows that there's a Native American view of history that's quite different than your Euro settler view, and that's I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying generations now of Native Americans are going to say the same thing that Geary Hobson said. But it's something, that he said that, and that, he seemed to have considered Lafferty a real ally about these things. And I will just say about this, it's good fun. Did I say Fall of Rome? I think I think The Flame of Screen is a romp. Fall of Rome is a romp rant oscillation, I'm going to call it. And Oklahonali is a romp. It says plenty, but it's a romp. It's not always rompy, but let's put it more in that category. But this is one of 3 books in my adult life that when I closed the last page, I was surprised. I didn't know this was about to happen. I read the last word, closed it, and tears sprang into my eyes. And that happened with very different novels. Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and a recent novel by a Blackfeet Native American author called Stephen Graham Jones, his novel, The Only Good Indians. All 3 of those novels, I read the last word, close them, and I'm like, they hit you. And this hits you in a very different way than those other 2 novels, both of which are horror novels of sorts, and this is not that. But there's a heft to it, and there's the way it slowly winds up, and his deathbed and his granddaughter, and the talk of the smoke going up and the story's over, and a lost sort of life. It's elegiac, but at the same time, it's quite clearly saying Native Americans are still very much here with us, and you see that in Lafferty's short stories. Native Americans tend to be contemporary people. His neighbors that he knew and stuff is what he was drawing from. But yeah, so it's poignant, powerful work. Flawed though it may be, a Euro settler trying to write, a Native American history. But so that's 72. Then there's the silence from Lafferty. Tell me if you know what's happening in like 73, 74, 75. I think one more collection of stories comes out, but it's actually older stuff, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get to that. But there's kind of this radio silence, I think, from what I understand. And then, maybe Lafferty's lost some people at this point. And this book ain't gonna help. Not to mention camels, baby. Love this book. Wild. There's another Dobson cover that sometimes people hate on. I think it's quite fun. This cover I used to not like. dang on, I almost said some swear words. I love this cover. I love that cover, and it actually kind of tells you a little bit what the story's like, because it's a multi-world story. We're used to the multiverse idea now, but this was '76, and not too many people were doing that kind of thing, and he does it in a very unique way. Now we think of multiverse and we think of like these endless iterations of superheroes or whatever it may be. There's 9 worlds in this novel, so it's quite limited, and this guy, this politician, kind of hops from world to world. In iterations of himself with slightly different names. And he's always trying to get political power. He's a nasty character. And it's weird to have him as, sort of your main character. And there's a couple parts that are really gruesome, like stomach-churning gruesome. And but the sort of worlds can be quite subtly different or like really wildly different. There's some really wild things. I'm going to call this a rant, actually, because it's so philosophical. There's a lot of philosophical chat in it, but it's the most colorful rant you could imagine. And it's still it's very rompy. Maybe I should call it a hybrid, a fusion of sorts, but it's pretty ranty. It's a lot of philosophical discourse, but it's not, I didn't find it dull. I found it really easy to finish, even though I didn't know what was going on or what it was about. And some people in the past have understood me as not liking this novel. I guess because there's an aspect to it that made me feel icky, almost a hatred on Lafferty's part for maybe his ideological enemies or something. And I don't like that. And I need to go back and see if that's really there, or if I read into it or misunderstood it. But it's still just, wow, it is a masterpiece. I think French fans, I've found, I consider it like a masterpiece. Take from that what you will. Yeah, so I'm going to call it, I was all set on rant, and now I'm going back on it. Let's call it a rant romp fusion. And it's, it ranges around from the fantastical to the satirical and so on, and all that mixed together. And it's really good. But it can be a hard read for people. And we're almost finished with the 70s here. We've got Apocalypses, which is 2 novels in one, collected together for, as far as anyone knows, really no good reason. The novels are entitled, Where Have You Been, Sandaliotis? That's the first one. And the second one is entitled, The 3 Armageddons of Enniscorthy Sweeney. I wonder why they just put them together and call it Apocalypses. These are not catchy titles, although I do think, the 3 Armageddons of Enniscorthy Sweeney, Philip K. Dick, I think, has kind of set the stage for titles like that, maybe. Anyway, they are sort of apocalypses of sorts. The first one is not highly rated by most fans. I loved it. I thought it was very fun. Definitely a romp. The greatest detective in the world, Constantine Quiche, is the star of this one. And a giant landmass appears out of thin air one morning off the coast of a place, extending that country, and everybody's trying to figure out if it's real or not. And it's a bit confusing, but there are some pyrotechnics in here, man. There are some moments, and there's like these like sort of clock people sort of being tortured as human clocks, and with a pit of rats down below them. And somebody's like making a movie of that or something. I don't know. That's just like one thing out of a million in there, and it's not all grotesque. There's other kinds of wonders and what have you. But I understand that people maybe don't like it as much, and I don't think it's top stuff. But I like it a lot. And then you come to this very serious novel. In the sense of like its scope and its reach. What's the word I'm looking for? Its ambition. Very ambitious novel, The 3 Armageddons of Enniscorthy Sweeney. It melted my brain. It made me feel mental pain, not physical. I didn't get a headache. I felt mental pain in a good way. It's a wonderful novel. I very much enjoyed reading it. Did not find it hard to finish. Maybe a little sloggy here and there, but it's just what it was trying to do with reality and mutually exclusive reality and affirming these at the same time really hurt my mind at a few points. But I don't, it's fine. Yeah, it hurt me. This is good stuff. And it ranges around. It's got like historical fiction parts that are really quite readable and good. And it's got like long sort of like essays that like are some of the best parts because they talk about like creating worlds and stuff. It gets really mythical. But then it ranges around. Anyway, this guy writes these operas that seem to erase the world wars from our memories or maybe from reality. It's very hard to tell. Ambitious work, very good. But Lafferty's off. I would say from the 70s, Lafferty, takes a turn that he doesn't come back from, and you follow him or you don't, because the 80s are only going to get weirder and more experimental in a lot of ways, in certain respects, but also very fun, I think, in some ways. The last one is 1979, Archipelago. I lost it. It's been missing for 2 years. I keep thinking it's going to turn up. It was not cheap. It's very rare. Beautiful book. It's beautifully bound and good edition. Anyway, it's the first book in the Argo mythos that comes before The Devil's Dead, though it was published much later and probably revised a bit in that later time too. And it tells more about the main character, among others, but of The Devil's Dead, Finnegan, which I had no idea there was more to this Finnegan character. He's a great Lafferty character that people love, and you hear more about him in here. And I think it's very uneven. I think it's a very uneven novel. It just doesn't work on certain moments for me. But when it's on, it's so on. It's like some of the best Lafferty I've ever read. Again, sort of magical realism, mythic type stuff, but like built around World War II army buddies and stuff. Great novel. And that's the 70s. That's Lafferty in the 70s. We did it. I'm trying to make these a little shorter, but it's about the best I can do with this many books. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you'll come back. Hope you'll comment and tell me what you think of these novels, whether you rate them as a romp or a rant or whatever, and fact check me and all that good stuff. And subscribe if you want to be alerted when new stuff comes up. And we're gonna get to the 80s pretty soon. Thanks for listening. Take care, guys.